Swapna and Madhulika Liddle. This session will be chaired by Mr. Ravi Shankar, Consulting Editor, Sunday Standard. So as we set the stage for it, let me take this opportunity to introduce them. Ms. Swapna Liddle is the author of several books on the history of Delhi for many years. She has also been closely involved in the movement to preserve historic sites and monuments. She works to popularize history and the cause of heritage protection through talks, heritage walk, social and mainstream media. Her most recent books are The Broken Script, Delhi under East India Company and the Fall of the Mughal Dynasty, 1803 to 1857, Shah Jahanabad, Mapping a Mughal City, and Gardens of Delhi, co-authored with her sister Madhulika, who is, of course, a novelist, award-winning short story writer, best known as a writer of historical fiction. Among her most popular books are the Muzaffar Jung series, featuring a Mughal detective in 17th century Delhi, and The Delhi Quartet, a 4-book historical series of which the second novel, An Unholy Drought, was released in May 2024. She also writes fiction in other genres, such as social issues and humor, besides writing on cinema, food, and travel. So let's make some noise for Sisterhood as we invite them on stage with Mr. Ravi Shankar, who's going to take the session forward from here.
Good afternoon. I'm again in the middle of this august audience for the last so many years. The Liddle sisters, if I may call them. They are historians. I don't think you need any, they don't really need an introduction. Tell me something. Both of you seem to be steeped in the history of Delhi. Apart from the historical background, so why is it only because you live in Delhi that this is something beyond that?
If I'll start, first of all, thank you so much to the organizers of the Odisha Lit Fest. It's such a pleasure to be in this wonderful state and in this wonderful city for both of us. So we are most grateful, and among such a great number of wonderful authors, readers. We always look forward to interacting more with readers as well. So thank you everyone so much for this. For me, I'm a historian by training, I would say, because I've studied history. I did a couple of research degrees in history. So history was my first love. I actually came to Delhi's history not simply because I lived there, but also because I became interested in the cause of heritage protection. I started doing heritage walks in Delhi. Delhi is a very historic place, of course, and it has a lot of these old monuments and all. And it, like Bhubaneswar is also one of those places which has an amazingly rich built heritage. So Delhi is like that. And I became interested in trying to preserve those, and I started doing walks. And then I said, okay, let me read a little bit more about the history, and that's how my interest in Delhi, writing about Delhi, also developed. So I was a historian before, but because of the walks around Delhi, so yes, I think living in Delhi has had an impact on that.
I just get back to you. I mean, the nature of historical writing of history has changed. The narration has changed a lot in the last kind of, I think, 20 years, where history is more accessible to the ordinary reader, much more than like, old days like Toynbee. It's changed a lot. So, which means that a historian who's like you, who's writing about, let's say, monuments coming into the picture, would have a certain amount of impact and influence on people, more than that would have had on people who are really experts in history or, who are just history aficionados. There are a lot of monumental savagery happening in Delhi, so much of encroachment, so much of kind of, destruction, so much of complete callousness now, and also a certain communal angle to it, which has crept in the last 10 years. So, as a historian, especially who has been championing Delhi, who has been taking people by introducing Delhi of the past to people, how are you doing anything, or is your voice able to kind of, stop at least some of the degradation which is going on in the historical monuments?
So there are two hats I wear. One is, of course, as a writer of history, And that's where my academic interest comes in. Though, of course, all my writing, it's never been for an academic readership. I always write for a regular readership, and I try to make it,
that's
I
what I
hope,
said.
accessible. So, and really the walks that I do, historical walks, have also been with the aim of raising awareness among people. And I have volunteered for many years now, for about 2 decades, for the Indian National Trust for Art and Cultural Heritage. And for some years, I was also the convener of the Delhi chapter. And I think it has made a difference. I'm not saying that the difference can be very palpably felt in the actual preservation of monuments, because these things continue to happen. Demolitions, vandalization, I'm not saying it's not happening, but there is a greater, I think, eye on monuments.
I love the way it's cut to the question.
The way, it's hard to, make those correlations, but there has been, for instance, let me just give you a very simple example. 20 years ago, heritage was not something that figured in media stories. Today, you pick up a newspaper, and every other day there will be some story about some monument. So just the fact that it's become something that people talk about, I think that is a result of this greater engagement of people with knowing about what their city is. And Delhi is one place where everybody is running to just, get by with their everyday work and don't look at things like the past and how their city reflects that. So I think it has made a difference. I don't know when we will start to see greater effect on the ground.
Thank you, Madhulika, by the way. I really enjoy the reviews you do for the magazine. Let me ask you a question about your subject, your detective. He's a very whimsical character. He's a very anti-hero, of a hero. And it's set in a very, authentic Mughal setting, I may say. At least when you read, you kind of feel like that. As Swapna was talking earlier, how much of research did you have to do to get it right?
Okay, let me first begin, of course, by echoing Swapna's thanks to everybody, those who organized, those who invited us, and those who are here. Thank you so much. So, let me just give a little background to what our moderator is talking about. Muzaffar Jung is a historical detective who features in my first 4 books. So the first 4 books which I wrote, the Muzaffar Jung series, are a collection of detective novels which are set in 1656 Delhi. That is the time when Shah Jahan had just shifted his capital from Agra to Delhi. And he had built this new city called Shah Jahanabad with Red Fort at its, sort of fulcrum. And Muzaffar Jung is this maverick who is a nobleman, but he goes about, he solves crimes in the city. For one book, he goes to Agra. So to answer your question, Muzaffar Jung, the inspiration for Muzaffar Jung arose partly out of the fact that Delhi was the city I was most comfortable with. Delhi was the city I was most comfortable with, because I had spent, by the time I wrote the Muzaffar Jung books, I had been in Delhi for almost 20 years. So of all the cities I'd ever been in, that was the city I was most familiar with. And I wanted to write a historical detective because while historical detectives are very, very common outside of India, at that time there was no Indian historical detective. Today there are quite a lot of authors who are writing detectives set in, say, colonial India. So there are a lot. But Muzaffar Jung is still the only pre-colonial, as far as I know, major detective series. So what had happened was that I wanted to write a historical detective. And because of my familiarity with Delhi, so I thought, okay, we'll write a story which is set in Delhi. And of course, I think a lot of the research, one of the reasons why I chose the Mughal era is because there's a lot of documentation. So there's a lot of stuff you can find fairly easily, even if you don't read Persian or Urdu or whatever. If you read even English, there's a lot of material around. And what I try to do in my books is not just talk about
the court and stuff, but also how everyday people lived, what were the sort of social norms around, what they ate, how they dressed, things like that. So there was a lot of material to do research. Plus, of course, if you walk around old Delhi, even if you just sort of wander around, you can get a feel of, you have to put in a lot of imagination, but otherwise you do get a feel of what it might have been like.
Okay, this is not about myself. I wrote a book called The Brahmin, which was based in Ashoka, period of Ashoka. I mean, research was exhausting. I mean, it is really exhausting because there's so little research available. But while in Delhi, there is hell of a lot of research material possible, as I would kind of say. I mean, so is Agra. So to transpose your story, the outlines of the story, the character of the people involved onto that setting, how much was the combination of research and imagination, like 50-50, 40-30? I mean, like, how did they feed into each other?
As far as getting the two together is there, I think the background is mostly all historical research. It's only in, say, the details of actually doing the plot, for instance, and how people interact. That is fictitious. So I would say it's probably 50-50. It's probably 50-50 because, there's a lot of interactions happening. And of course, all the characters are fictitious. There are just one or two characters who are like glimpsed from a distance usually. So it's like the emperor. So like the first Muzaffar Jang's story begins on the riverfront of the Yamuna where an elephant fight is just beginning. And Shah Jahan is the one who throws up he flips a coin to sort of start the fight off. So it's just these important people, the real people, are just glimpsed from a distance and very briefly. But otherwise, it's all fictitious characters. And so all the interactions which happen between them, all their conversations, those are all fictitious. But what they eat, for instance, or how they dress, or where they go in the city, the monuments which are mentioned, those are all real.
Okay, so, historical crime fiction, let's put it that way, that actually started with the British, if I'm not mistaken. Ellis Peters, the Catfield series, and Roy Jenkins, and all those stories about Elizabeth in England. Then you go back to, there's an entire series on a Roman, I forget
Stephen
the names
Saylor.
now. Yeah,
Also Lindsay Davis.
Lindsay Davis. Yeah, it's
Falco.
so much of
Yeah,
it, so much of it. And see, for example, if you look at one particular genre, which is essentially Elizabeth crime fiction, which seems to stand out much more than the others, the era, of England at that particular time, Elizabeth in England, it was so full of espionage and intrigue and, trying to protect England from the Catholic armies and stuff like that. When you wrote your books, which set in Shah Jahan's era, was there that kind of a dramatic kind of, historical events which influenced you into these narratives?
This is actually an interesting period because, Shah Jahan, he did not probably, I don't know if he realized at that time, but he was on the end of being pushed off the throne. He was right on the edge of that because my stories take place in 1656, 1657. And 1658, I think Swapna was when Aurangzeb came to the throne. So Shah Jahan was, he was about to be pushed off the throne. And then Aurangzeb's coming to the throne was, the intrigue had started long before. And he had already sort of been making pacts with his other brothers and sort of conspiring against Dara Shikoh and things like that. So it was an interesting period and there was intrigue happening. But yes, I will admit that I never got around to writing this book, I had planned to write a book which would be set in Aurangzeb's time, and Aurangzeb coming to the throne.
Very interesting.
I
never take a political position, though.
I haven't got around to that yet, so I don't know when that's going to happen.
I'm not trying to provoke a family quarrel here. How authentic is her historical research?
Oh, her historical research is very authentic because, in fact, I think, so it's interesting, in the sense that for her, when you're writing historical fiction, the main thing is, it's of course about historical events and individuals, but much more than that, it is about creating an authentic setting. So she really, I must say, puts in a lot of effort on that, and therefore that is really good, because it really sets that, you know, one of the things that I remember she told me once when she was writing her very first book was when she realized that tea drinking, for instance, tea drinking was not a big thing in India till very, very recently. So in Mughal times, it was actually coffee houses. Coffee was drunk, and coffee was it was a fashionable drink to drink, and there were coffee houses, and therefore her detective often ends up in coffee houses where he meets a lot of people. So those kind of authentic settings is something that she's good at that, and she puts, and simply because she puts in a lot of effort. Where I sometimes help is to give her book reading recommendations, say that maybe you read this and maybe you'll get. So I don't set myself as an expert on that, but she does all the work. But I think like a little aside, I want to talk about this, that a lot of people will get their first taste of Mughal history, say, by watching a film or reading a novel or something like that, not by reading hardcore history. So therefore, I think it becomes very important that this kind of fictional work, whether it's a movie or a detective or a historical fiction novel, and she's written other than mystery also, she's written other kinds of historical novels as well, that if it has that authentic setting, at least somebody who may not read any other history book during their adult life will actually get something out of it, which actually gives them a somewhat more authentic view of the past.
Okay, this is something which I wanted to ask historians. How do you see history? I mean, do you see history as a linear progression of events? Do you see history as a context to explain the present or the past? Do you see history as a bridge between the consciousness of one civilization and the perceptions, or the current intellectual or emotional life of the people you are, or the ethos you are living in? How do you see history? What's the definition? Not definition. How do you see history?
So, I'm so glad you asked me this question, actually, because I think this is something that needs to be addressed to an audience who may not be people who have studied history beyond school. And I think a lot of the confusion happens because we use the word history for two related but not identical things. One is generally for the past and the things that happened in the past. We say this is history when we mean that this is what this is past. This is something that happened in the past. Now, we use the word history also for the study of that past. And this is really, this is something that has to be seen, because we don't do this with other disciplines. There is the natural world, maybe the plant world. We know that the plant world is something out there. We use the word botany for the study of that world. We don't mean that these two are identical. The study is not the thing. But here, we think that what historians do is somehow capture what is out there and present it to you. It's the same thing. It's not. So what happens is, what happened in the past is happened in the past. There is no way of actually capturing that in a very shall we say, in a very direct manner. It's not something that is descending into our heads, or we have some way of retrieving that. What history as a discipline does is it works on there is something called a historical fact, and looks at various sources, interprets them, analyzes them, and gives explanations for what might have happened in the past. And there is a historical method by which you do it, and therefore I feel that history as a discipline is important as well. And not, just by looking at some sources about the past, you cannot immediately become a historian. You need that training as well. So that aspect, I think, is important. That distinction between an explanation for the past and the past itself are two things.
Thanks. We lead over to her. We lead, usually all of us lead very mundane lives. We get up in the morning, we brush our teeth, we have breakfast, go to work or not go to work, or go to a party in the evening or not, or whatever. But we don't realize that we're just blips. We're in the middle of history, right? I mean, this 100 years later, 20 years later, we would have been part of that particular period. Even if you don't have the emergency, did the same thing, during a war, you did the same thing, right? So as a writer of fiction, you look at the most dramatic aspects of history, the blood, the murder, the gore, the elopement, the wars, I mean, the dramatic backdrops of history is what a writer of fiction looks for. Did you find the particular period you had put, Shah Jahan, at the time segueing into Aurangzeb's line, he's still a prince at that particular, at that time. What were the backdrops you found most interesting to, to bring to life the Mughal era at that time?
I really can't say there was any particular thing. It's less of the events that were happening and more of the spaces. For instance, the first Muzaffar Jung book, The Englishman's Cameo, is not set around any particular event. It happens in the wake of Shah Jahan shifting the capital to Shahjahanabad. But after that, it is it's the Red Fort, or it is the Jama Masjid, or it is Chandni Chowk, which is the setting, and it is not, there is stuff happening in the background.
Yeah.
Aurangzeb's sort of getting restless. So in fact, there was this very amusing incident that Aurangzeb had been sent to the Deccan as the Subedar of the Deccan. And there was apparently this mango tree, which was part of his Suba, and it produced the most delicious mangoes in all of the Deccan. And he was supposed to send an annual tribute of mangoes to Delhi. And when he chose to keep that tribute back and enjoy all the mangoes himself, that really got Shah Jahan really annoyed. So that is there. There are these little bits of trivia which I put in, but there's no overarching major event which is happening.
No, I'm talking about more than the event. Not what I'm talking about. See, I think after COVID, my memory is short. The modern historical fiction, there is this amazing writer who has set the stories in the backdrop of World War II Germany. He's a German policeman who tries to balance his life or his investigations between the Nazis and the actual crimes. I forget the name, he died recently. But what is interesting is the backdrop, the looming backdrop of the rise of Nazism, life under Nazism, then the slow decline of Germany into chaos, and then what happens after the war. So there's a backdrop against which human crime is almost like a Dostoevskian aspect of a detective novel. So
okay, I should explain that a little bit, because you see, with a detective novel, if you're going to write a detective novel which really grips your reader and which makes sense, you have to put a lot of effort into the mystery itself and the solving of that mystery. So it lessens your, and especially in India, where a lot of publishers are not willing to do very thick novels. Especially when you're writing detective fiction, they are very, very strict about word counts.
There's a comment on Indian publishing, not
so
the writer.
you cannot there's really not much scope for giving a very detailed backdrop, But having said that, I should say that the sort of thing you are saying about a very detailed historical backdrop, that is what comes through in my latest set of novels, which is the Delhi Quartet. The Delhi Quartet is a collection of 4 novels which span 800 years of Delhi's history. So that begins with, in about 1192, when Muhammad Ghori came to India, and it ends with partition. So I've written the first 2 books so far. So the first book is like the setup of the Delhi Sultanate and 200 years into it. The second book, which is An Unholy Drought, is up till the time of between Taimur's invasion and Akbar's ascension. And that is where, because they're not detective novels, they're stories about everyday people living their lives against history being made. And that is where I get a chance to really show how history is being made and how the common man and the common woman are trying to somehow come to terms with what is happening around them. You know, like for instance, in the first book of the series, which was called The Garden of Heaven, there's this young boy who's about 12 years old. He's a farmer's son. And in the wake of the first battle of Tarain, which is not the first battle, it's I think the second or the third battle, which is when Muhammad Ghori defeated Prithviraj Chauhan. This boy suddenly finds himself completely orphaned. None of his family are alive anymore. Their fields have been completely destroyed. His village has been destroyed. So he's alone. So how does he rebuild his life? You know, so that sort of thing. And this is a thread which continues, which I try to continue through the series, that how history which is being made, which has been created around them, and there are, you know, sort of events which are outside of their control, how they still affect the lives and the circumstances of everyday people.
Right. You know, over to you. I would not always agree that history is written by the victors, because it's subsequently rewritten by the next victors, and then next victors keep going back and forth. So you really cannot divorce history from politics. And I don't mean what politics, I mean politics. I mean the political ethos of that particular point when a certain thing is happening. How do you interpret Delhi in a historically political way? I mean the politics of Aurangzeb, or the politics of the Chauhans, or you know the politics of the the one culture overtaking the other, establishing structures.
I think there are many dimensions to your question, and one of those is the thing of the first point that you mentioned, that it's a trite saying that history is written by the victors. And again, there what we are talking about is another kind of history writing, that is the history of the court chronicler. The Shah Jahan's historian, who is a captive courtier who is sitting there and chronicling the reign. And that kind of history writing, that kind of court chronicling is a very different thing altogether. You are an establishment, you want to project that whatever reign it is in the best possible light, etc. So that's a very different kind of writing. I would not strictly, I would draw a sharp distinction between that and professional history writing, which hopefully one should be doing. And I'm not saying that professional history writers are completely divorced from politics. Of course not. We are all living within our own worlds, and we are political people. And yes, we look at, but we have at least some of the tools and awareness, hopefully, to realize that we need to, be professional historians and follow methods, etc., of our writing. But the way in which it affects us, which is a very easy to grasp way, is that we are aware. It's the questions we ask. What are the questions we are interested in asking today? And that is often reflected by the world we live in. True. And what we say. 100 years ago, historians writing invariably wrote about the politics of their era. Of the politics of the past. They talked about kings. They talked about empires and all those kind of important, and they wrote about battles and things. And today historians are more interested in the lives of people, their social lives, their cultural lives, their emotional lives. They are much more interested in trying to grasp the diversity of people, not just rulers. So it's about what are the questions that you ask, and which is again, for instance, I wrote my major book is the Broken Script, which is on the Delhi during the company period, and I of course, it is about rulers as well, but it is an attempt to actually capture the lives and developments in a much wider sphere. So I'm not primarily only interested in rulers and what they do.
I mean, I think the bell is tolled or rung, or which way we want to put it. Look at it. You know, again, getting back to the depiction of history, the Mughals painted the Hindus as weak. The British painted the Maharajas as fops. And, you know, I would forget the description Curzon had given of the Indian Maharajas as, it's rather, we're not taking sides here. Would a historian be able to correct, like Manu Pillai's tried to do, he tried to do it in one recent book I've been reading. Can a historian correct a perception? And how accurate would the perception be? Because you're really going back in time to do that, right?
Again, I would, if I'm doing an honest job as a historian, first of all, I think I don't set out, I think a historian should not set out with an idea that they have an agenda to fulfill. That I need to clear up this and I need to prove that. I think that is, yes, you may be interested in a particular subject because something intrigues you about the past, but then from then on you have to keep an open mind and see what you find in history, see what your sources tell us, and try to present it as honestly as you can. And so I hope that when somebody reads a book of history written by me, they get an idea of what I'm saying about the past, and also on what basis I am saying that. Because it's a little difficult to explain that, but the kind of narrative style that I use is to incorporate some of that. So I use a lot of actual quotations from historical figures, and then I weave my narrative around that. So hopefully people will get to look at the past a little differently. But again, as I'm saying, I don't set out with that as a declared agenda.
Yeah, though a lot of readers might not agree. Writers are also human beings with all the, you know, good and bad in them. I'm asking, I mean, someone who writes non-fiction, someone who writes fiction, it's impossible to not have a point of view when you're, you know, when you're writing something or reading something. It's impossible to be completely neutral. It doesn't exist except for the Buddha. How do you guys kind of, you know, divorce yourself from a point of view of what you, if what I'm reading you write?
Yes, of course. I'm not saying that. Neutrality is a very. Neutrality only comes in because we think that the purpose of history writing is to pass judgment. Okay. I disagree with that entirely. I'm saying that my role as a historian is not to pass judgment on figures from the past. I don't. I try and explain the past as I see it, and I give you reasons for why I see this. As it's not my agenda at all to pass.
No, it's
any
not an agenda. I mean a point of view.
So,
what would you?
Anyway, but I again, as I feel that yes, of course, my own circumstances, my own personality, all of that affects what I write. Absolutely. But I don't set out to write a work of fiction. So it's the intent with which you start also has something.
I think I should just take that forward. She doesn't set out to write a work of fiction. I do.
Yeah.
So when you're writing a work of fiction, I have definite agendas.
You do, right.
I definitely have agendas, and you can probably see it if you read my books.
Okay, now I see her coming to end. There's no last question. Do you sisters help each other writing fiction? Do you guys kind of, you know, feed into each other's knowledge, information, imagination?
Madhulika, I always enjoy reading her books because she has, of course, it's a lovely story, and I love to read that. But she has a lot of. She is much more versatile than I am in my writing. I'm a one-trick horse. I write about the history of Delhi. She has these amazing interests. She writes fiction. She writes about food. She knows a lot about horticulture and and plant life and animal life and
Cinema.
Cinema, yes, of course, cinema. That's
Saja never
fabulous.
saw one.
Yes. So she has, in fact, the book that we collaborated on last was a book on the gardens of Delhi, and I wrote about the history, and she wrote about the horticulture. So I think I learn a lot from her. So I don't know. As I said, she does a lot of the research, and I think most of the time I'm just recommending books to her.
But those are like really helpful because seriously, Swapna is my greatest resource.
Thank you so much for these two Nepo babies mutually.
Thank you
I
so
really
much.
enjoy your books. Thank you for coming. Thank you.